Hello everybody, my name is Jane Burns and I'm the Director of Consulting at CERES and I will be your MC today. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that I have the privilege of working on this great project alongside my team at CERES and with Ross at Think Impact and with Bernadette Hetherington and colleagues at Moreland City Council. And I want to give the Mayor of Moreland City Council, Councillor Matt Riley, a shout out. He is part, along with some colleagues at CERES, for being the early champions of this project. Councillor Riley is unable to attend today, although like the sacred kingfisher along the Merri Creek, he may well fly in if he can make it. And connected to this work are many community organisations. And I want to pay thanks in particular to the work we've done to date with the Merri Creek Management Committee, the Friends of Merri, Netchi and the Wurundjeri Cultural Consultations team, in particular to Elder Aunty Gail Smith and Aunty Julianne Axford. Now today is the first public facing event for the project. So we welcome all of you from community, from business, from schools and from government, and thank you for taking the time to attend. I also thank those who've already shared what they love about the creek and their vision for how it could be on the project webpage of Consultations Moreland. Now we have a dynamic program for you today. We're joined by executive leadership at Moreland City Council, a lead academic in the Merri Creek Coburg Safety Survey, traditional owners and Think Impact. And we also have the City of Darebin Deputy Mayor, Councillor Trent McCarthy and Councillor Tom Hanna in the audience with us today. So now I'm going to introduce Eamonn Fennessy, Director of Community Development at Moreland City Council, to do an acknowledgement and also to say a few opening remarks about the project.
Hello everyone, it's terrific to be here in this session. My name's Eamonn Fennessy. I'm the Director of Community at Moreland City Council. I have in my area a team who are focusing on this work and leading it, along with CERES. And I also have a very long and deep interest in the Merri Creek as a Darebin resident, just as an aside. Before we do start, I'd like to acknowledge that the event today is being held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. This land was taken from them without a treaty process, consent or compensation, and sovereignty was never ceded. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri as the traditional owners and custodians of these lands and waterways, and would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, as well as any First Nations communities who are here with us today, or people. Thank you. Before we start, I'd like to also acknowledge the many people who have come together on this project over a number of years now, and some of you are with us today. I'd like to pay particular respect, I suppose is the right word, and really acknowledge the fantastic work over decades of both the Friends of Merri Creek and the Merri Creek Management Committee in making the Merri Creek and its tributaries, Edgar's and others, what it is today. And I think it's very easy for us to take for granted the fantastic place that it is. And I'd really like to acknowledge the hard work that has happened and continues, and the hard gains that have been won over many years. Before we go into proceedings today, I'd like to share a bit of background about this project. So the call for a Merri Creek and Surrounds visioning exercise arose amongst a range of community organisations and members following discussions that occurred after an appalling attack on a woman along the creek in East Coburg in late 2019. So as a response to that terrible event, a safety report was developed, but community members and community organisations also recognised coming out of that the unique values of the Merri Creek catchment, the strong community interest and involvement that has developed around it over many decades, as I've just talked about, the great things that council and community organisations and individuals are already doing, the opportunity to build on this to more comprehensively address issues such as safety and safe spaces for women, in particular, connection to sort of the Aboriginal history of the area and the important stories of country and ongoing connection to this place that the Wurundjeri have, celebrating the creek through art and sculpture and other creative pursuits, and rewilding. And there's a lot that we can talk about there from a Friends and a Merri Creek Management Committee perspective. So rewilding and embracing urban food cultivation across the region as a leading example for other Australian and global communities. And also like to acknowledge CERES are here with us today and the great work that they've done over many decades on that front. So with those things in mind, a community visioning exercise was proposed. And in December 2020, the City of Moreland resolved to receive a report on a community proposal, which came to us in early 2021 and was endorsed by Council for a Merri Creek and Surrounds visioning exercise. And there were some funds attributed to that project to employ an appropriate consultant, and we've got CERES on board. Jane is leading that work to lead us on that exercise. A number of workshops were held in 2021, in May and July, with people from across the community, but also key stakeholders with a deep interest in the Merri Creek on what people's perspectives were now and going forward on the use and care of the creek, and how we do things more and differently and in an amplified way. It'd be fair to say that participants from those workshops recognised the creek as a living place for all to come together, but that there was an opportunity to further collaborate to help the creek become a healthy and safe living place for all to nurture, learn, share and grow. So really that's how that vision came together. The vision really is about how we take our approach to the creek forward as a community, and it's about building on the incredible work that's happened in the last 30 or 40 years, the strategies that have been put in place, the many different ways that the creek and its community have benefited from those approaches and strategies, but really building on those and looking at where else can we reach into, particularly in terms of celebrating culture and natural features and addressing community safety. So I might leave it there and pass back to Jane at this point. Thank you.
So I've mentioned that we've had the privilege of working with the Wurundjeri Cultural Consultations team with Aunty Gail Smith and Aunty Julianne Axford over the past 4 to 5 months. And we've been very focused on one particular piece of work around language and working with Elder Aunty Gail in the naming for this project in Wurrung language. And I'm very clear to say that this is a naming for the project. It's not about naming for any waterway or any particular location. It's a naming for the project. We recently recorded Aunty Gail introducing a Wurrung language word to use alongside existing traditional language. And it was a wonderful experience to listen to her talk about the importance of bringing language, knowledge and culture back, and how all of us are needed to look after the waterways for animals and plants and future generations. And I wholly thank the time and the care and consideration that Elder Aunty Gail has given to this piece of work. And I'm now going to play a recording for you to listen to Aunty Gail against some video of the Merri Creek.
Womanjeka Yamaku Naranink Bamboo Gale Wurundjeri Wurrung Nangit. Welcome everyone. My name is Aunty Gail. I am a Wurundjeri Wurrung elder. I'm very proud to be a part of this project Merri Merri, Wayi, meaning Merri Merri, us. Merri Creek was and still is very important to Wurundjeri peoples. Our ancestors once camped along there, they walked along there. And in some parts, we are walking in their footsteps, which we all should be proud of. Language, for me, is very important, as we lost a majority of it due to colonisation. And I look at it that it should be our first language and not our second. But it is very important, not just to me, but to all Wurundjeri family members, is our language and our culture. Giving the Merri Merri Wayi a name is very important. Merri Merri is a language name as it is, but to add Wayi at the end of it, it includes Wayi means us. I look at it, it includes all of us. It is all of us to be responsible. I think if we respect the creek, that will make us keep it clean, and for it to be there not only for the animals that need it, but we need it, and the plants need it. So it involves all of us, so I am glad. No, I am proud to have given the last bit of word to Merri Merri, Wayi, meaning us, at the end of Merri Merri, because it includes all of us. And that's what the waterways needs, all of us. The land, country needs all of us. So on that, I'd say non-godgen. Thank you, and especially to Merri Merri, Wayi, Merri Merri, us.
Okay, at this point I'm going to hand over to Dr. Gill Matthewson from XYX Lab at Monash University. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, but I just want to say thank you to Gill for joining us today, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
So I am part of the Monash University XYX Lab, and we address the complex intersections of space, gender and identity through design practice, through workshops, installations, women's safety audits and communication. Down the bottom there. Moreland City Council engaged the XYX Lab to conduct a women's safety survey of the Coburg section of Merri Creek between Bell and Moreland Road, following high levels of public concern over the particularly nasty attack on a young woman there in December 2019 that Eamonn mentioned. Now, safety for women in public spaces is really quite complex. But basically women experience public spaces differently to men because of gender bias that permeates our social world. And there are two main consequences of gender bias that impact on women's ability to be in public space: gender-based violence and the gender-biased built environment. But an individual woman's experiences are coloured also by their identity, other identity factors and their personal history. Women are also affected by the stories that they hear in the media and from friends and relatives. Other people in an area also affect our perceptions, and there are also spatial conditions that impact. Women read the physical and social aspects of public spaces for clues around risk. In response to this, women develop a wide range of precautionary behaviours that they might not even call precautionary behaviours in order to keep themselves safe. In particular, women limit their movements through and engagements with public space, and also try to visually signal that they are on guard. Now, we kind of know all this stuff, but the safety audit for Merri Creek wanted to know how this might manifest in the creek area itself. Now, COVID meant that we opted for an online survey rather than a traditional women's safety audit. We asked general questions and detailed questions about 6 different sites around along the Coburg's side of Merri Creek between Bell and Moreland. You know, we wanted to know, what did women observe there, what made it seem safe or not safe, the impact of litter, of lighting or the lack of. And we asked what are the best and the worst things and what could be done to increase usage and a sense of safety. While going online was an absolutely necessary move because of COVID, it was also amazingly successful. We had nearly 900 people come into the survey. 78 of them were tourists, they were just checking it out. We only had 1 troll, which is actually very few for this kind of survey. But what it really indicated was a very high level of engagement from local women and their willingness to reflect on their safety and to offer solutions. And we think that's something that the council and various other people can really capitalise on. And with over 800 respondents, we had a lot of material to work with, which is the reason why the report was so big, and you can find that on the Moreland Council site. Not everyone filled in the full survey, but we did get detailed demographic information from over 500 respondents. I have to say, I thought we might get about 300 respondents, so to have the data from more than 800 was amazing. Overwhelming, the best thing about the Merri Creek was being able to be close to nature and the water. And it was a relief from the busy streets and density of buildings that surround the area. And Joe's garden down here was particularly well liked. So what were people using this area for? It supports a range of informal active exercise and leisure opportunities, not so much sport, because the formal sport areas are either on the other side of the creek or to the north or south of the area we were looking at. Nearly 3/4 of the respondents used it for more than one activity. Most used it for walking, and that held true for all the ages. For younger respondents, running was very popular, cycling for the middle years, and dog walking for the olders. And leisure activities included picnics, playing, and even, foraging for edible plants. We asked about before and after COVID use. And the highest proportion used it more under COVID. And it's not surprising, because it was clear that people were flocking to any nearby open space for their permitted exercise under COVID. But there was actually quite a strong difference depending on age. Parts of the creek became very crowded under lockdown, and where the path was narrow, it was difficult to maintain physical distancing. And this concerned older users more, and they actually used it less under lockdown. We provided safety sliders or a sliding scale question of how safe or unsafe did people think each of the 6 areas were? And you can see that there are responses from either end of the scale, and this reflects the diversity of the women using the space. Just to say, I can see some people are in the chat, but I can't monitor the chat at the moment. So if you need to say something, you'll have to unmute yourself. The grey line indicates the average. So site E, the off-leash dog park, was the safest area, and site A near Bell Street was considered the most unsafe. When we asked why a particular site felt unsafe, and we offered standard answers. Overall, it's isolation. The glory of, which is the reddy orangey bar here. The glory of Merri Creek is there's a slice of nature, but that can also mean it's very quiet and isolated. Because of this, it's very much a no-go zone after dark, and even during the day, some reported parts of the area as unnerving, which is the dark blue bar here. Some paths along the creek provided too many people to hide, and some are very narrow, forcing women closer to strangers, and that can feel a bit entrapping. Respondents' perceptions of safety in Merri Creek are strongly affected by having heard stories of bad things happening here, especially for Site B, and that's near Joe's Garden, which was the site of the 2019 attack. Since the attack and news of it, some of the women respondents have been staying away from the creek area completely. For some, it's absolutely permanent and they're never going back. For others, it's at certain times of the day, or some will only go under certain conditions, such as when they're with someone else or when they know it will be busy. Now, although women fear this kind of attack, it is relatively rare. A very small proportion of the respondents had directly experienced any form of physical assault in the area. But then again, it may be that those who have experienced assault no longer use it or responded to our survey. But it just takes one attack to reignite all the stories that women are warned about from a very young age. There were those who argued that the attack had absolutely nothing to do with the characteristics of the creek, but had to do with poor resourcing of community services and a general disrespect for women in general. So if we go back to this diagram, we can understand how these uncoloured areas, media reports, isolation, poor lighting, and entrapment are particularly important for Merri Creek. Now, I would kind of say that feeling safe is not just about fear of attack. It's also feeling welcome, accommodated for, and like you have an unquestionable right to be there. So the main issue for Merri Creek is a common one in every public space, the tensions between different kinds of users, particularly the cyclist, the dog walker, and the wandering kids. Gender was tied up in here, with the most aggressive and abusive cyclists often being identified as men in lycra, who consider the paved creek path north of Harding Street Bridge to be a speed course. And of course, walkers wandering over the path without warning made life dangerous for cyclists. These are some of the other factors that influence that sense of belonging, and therefore the kind of sense of safety for women. I've just talked about the poor path sharing, but parts of the creek are highly littered and or smelly, making it quite unpleasant to be in. Poor dog management by owners, like uncontrolled dogs off leash, and inadequate dog poo removal were noted. There's also a lack of connectivity with the surrounding streets, meaning that there are not many ways of exiting should there be trouble. And there's also a lack of orienting or wayfinding signage, which means that some women feel unsafe because they don't know where they are or how close help might be. We asked women what they did to keep themselves safe on Merri Creek, and the most common tactic identify a significant factor is not to use the area after dark. So when we asked women if women used each of the sites after dark, barely 1 in 10 did so. Now, darkness is a very strong trigger for raising levels of caution and of fear. And so the classic responses to women's safety concerns is to throw in more lighting and then CCTV. While many of the survey participants said exactly that, there are also some more nuanced responses to this kind of infrastructure. Participants were also asked directly whether they would use the site after dark if it were lit. On average, 2 out of 5 just said no, they would not. And barely 1 in 5 said yes. The rest said kind of possibly. In their responses to other questions, women proposed caveats to their use if lit, especially not going alone. Even if lit, most of the creek corridor can feel isolated because it has very little passive surveillance. And this holds true even during the day. And isolation is something that no amount of lighting can resolve. And there was quite a significant number of respondents who highlighted the detrimental effects of lighting in a nature area. And they kind of didn't want it to happen. The kind of recommendations that came through came in 3 prongs: building community, building resilience through supporting community initiatives, communication and engagement, for example, communicating about shared path etiquette and that sort of thing. Also good news about the creek rather than bad news all the time. Infrastructure and amenities, more benches, path improvements and maintenance, fixing the Harding Street Bridge, which we understand is on the drawing board at the moment, and we would highly recommend bringing in some of the very much engaged local women into that design process. This map just kind of summarises some of the things. Lighting under the underpass. We think the new bridge at Harding Street needs to be very careful about sight lines, because on the eastern end, that's a real problem. And that would be me.
So now I'm going to introduce Ross Wyatt, who's the Managing Director of Think Impact. We started working with Ross and Think Impact last year on this project because of the work that he's going to take you through now, which is a collective impact framework. So Ross, I'm going to hand over to you now and look forward to being part of the online conversations with you.
Thanks, Jane. And there we go. So just sort of call this section, and this is not going to be so much a presentation, it's just a few minutes of discussion, but then it's going to be putting you to work and really listening to your views and gathering your views. And we've got a bit of an online mechanism to do that. So those of you that have computers in front of you, which should be everybody, it should be quite straightforward. For those of you with phones, apologies, this might be a little bit difficult for you to enter. I'm not quite sure how that will work, but we will give it a go. So this is about creating a movement for change, and I think that's one of the things that we've talked about, and is the acknowledgement of the amazing amount of work done by relatively few people, I suppose. You know, there's lots and lots if you look at the numbers of volunteers that have been engaged. But you think about the whole of the community. How can we engage more of the community to do more supportive work of the work of Friends of Merri Creek and Merri Creek Management Committee and others? So to do that, I want to sort of talk about these new ways of thinking and behaving when we're dealing with complex challenges, and certainly the restoration of a waterway and the work that's been done over the last 40 years is a very complex challenge. Even just talking this morning, you kind of get a sense of the diverse range of interests that we tend to bring. Because here's kind of one of the first things that you might think about when you're thinking, when we're dealing with complex challenges, that we all bring our specialised agendas. We all have a view about, I don't know, water or dog walking or safety, or, you know, they're all kind of, they're all parts of agendas. And we imagine, and the collective impact approach is very much one of, you know, what would happen if we had a common agenda rather than specialised agenda. And we've already done some of that work, and thanks to all the people that are involved, and I'll reflect on that in a minute, in actually starting to articulate what this common agenda might be. And the next kind of familiar way, or the old way, if you like, of thinking about is fragmented measurement. And, you know, wouldn't it be great if we kind of knew that we were making progress and we could share what that measurement worked? And when I say wouldn't it be great, these 5 features I'm going to talk about are actually have been tested and proven in collective impact initiatives or cross-sectoral kind of collaborations around restoration around the world. These 5 things have proved essential to actually getting successful outcomes. The next one, of course, is our activities. You know, what happens when our activities are independent? You know, we do something here, someone else does something here, someone else does something here. And this is not just about waterways, of course. This can apply in any field of social and environmental endeavour. And of course, what we're trying to do is work towards having mutually reinforcing activities, so that our activity reinforces others to the best way that we can, and they're not being done, everything's not being done individually. Sporadic communication, you know, what we found is it works much better when there's continuous communication. We don't just visit it now because there's a conversation going on, but how do we create a continuous kind of communication around and change conversations around safety, around ecosystems, around shared use, and all of those kind of things. And the final one, of course, is when the efforts are unsupported. And, you know, so often it's the endeavours of a few who have kind of created, often swimming against the tide, to actually get efforts up and running. And of course, what we're looking at now, what we find works really well, is there's some kind of backbone infrastructure to hold these initiatives together. Now, we've moved on a bit even further now, I think, in the thinking, and that's, I guess, when you talk about managing complex challenges, those 5 features that sit under there are the essence of what makes successful collaborative efforts or collective impact efforts. And as I say, I do urge you to have a look up, if you've got some time later on, to look up the Elizabeth River in Virginia in the US, which is a 10-kilometre stretch of waterway that's had a real successful restoration using this approach over many decades. Interestingly enough, and it says a lot about what we think about waterways, the source of the Elizabeth River is being called the Great Dismal Swamp, and that's its official name, or its official post-European settlement name. And it does say a lot about the way that we think about waterways, or have thought about waterways, when we call a beautiful wetland a great dismal swamp. Anyway, so new ways of thinking really say, well, if we take our common agenda and we start to say, well, let's also build into that an aspect of aspiration, not just agenda about what we want to do, but an aspiration about what the future might look like. If we take the shared measurement and we actually don't just measure things, but we actually learn from it, so strategic learning. If we start to think about things, you know, these independent activities, to actually start to see it as actually it's a system. There's a whole big system, a system of community, and learn from the ecosystems that are actually, we've got all of these interdependent relationships. When continuous communication, you also add real authentic community engagement, and that's why we're going to listen to you today and create a vehicle for you to have your voice heard in this today. And that backbone infrastructure becomes a real driver for community change. And that's when we're starting to talk about movement building to address complex challenges. So just a reminder, what's this got to do? What does this mean for Merri Merri Wayi? Well, already this conversation started, and it started 40 or 50 years ago by friends of Merri Creek and Merri Creek Management Committee, and many others as well who've been involved in actually starting to articulate a vision for what this might look like, what the Merri Merri might look like. And of course, the work done more recently in the past 6 months or so to actually build on that, has started to elicit this kind of idea that, you know, we've been asked to work out, well, how do we kind of balance the social, cultural and environmental needs? And can they be balanced? And what's the best way that we can balance? And the kind of language that you've helped us put together is kind of these two ideas that when we're looking at Merri Merri and us, Merri Merri Wai, it is a creek that we are required, we are responsible to nurture and allow to be a healthy waterway. But it's also a creek that enables us to learn, share and grow from each other. So, you know, these ideas of, you know, the Merri Merri University was one that came up that always sort of stuck with me, that, you know, it's a place where we do learn about ecosystems, we do learn about nature, we do learn about restoration, and we do learn about each other, especially when we've got so many different cultures that use that space. So it's really a place where our natural and urban worlds enable each other to thrive. So, you know, we have a responsibility as the urban part of it to allow the natural part to thrive, and the natural part boosts our ability to thrive as individuals. It's a place where it can actually add to our health and well-being as well. So you started to articulate a whole lot of things around it. I don't propose to go into all of those. They are published on the website and several other places as well. But everything from restoration of the wetlands and maintenance of the wetlands and vegetation and biodiversity, through to recognising and celebrating First Nations history and ongoing contribution to the creek. And over on the left there, you see some words that we were talking about earlier, Eamonn was talking about before, is, you know, how do we sort of amplify ourselves, to amplify the efforts to make it a living place for all to come together to safely nurture, learn, share and grow. So that was where the common agenda has got to, the common agenda conversation. But of course, the next step, as I articulated before, was actually the measurement. And so where to now? How do we know that we are actually moving in the right direction? What might that shared measurement look like? What might that learning look like? And to do that, you're going to help us in the next half an hour to help us answer and get your views and gather your views on how would we know that Merri Merri is improving from an environmental values perspective. So if you want to bring that perspective, you'll be asked to bring that perspective first. Then how would we know that Merri Merri is improving from a social and cultural values perspective? And we'll have that conversation. And then we'll come together and have a conversation about how those things work together. Okay, so that's where we're going now. And just look to acknowledge, to provide some food for thought, to get your sort of your thinking, because we're about to put you into breakout groups, and you'll be in groups of 4 or 5 or 6 people, and we'll give you a device to actually start gathering some thoughts, and just some food for that thought. You know, obviously, and we've just extracted some language, and apologies for you know, paraphrasing what is actually a big, complex, beautifully written documents, but just extracting some of the words out of it to just prompt our thoughts. You know, the MCMC Merri Creek and Environment, or the Merri Creek Management Committee Environment Strategy really talks about, you know, a healthy living stream. So how do we know that, you know, what does a healthy living stream look like to you? How would we know we are getting a healthy living stream? So give some thoughts about that. How would we know that we are restoring and valuing natural features, biodiversity, water quality? Probably relatively straightforward. Those water scientists among you can probably help us with that one pretty quick. There's other things that are a bit more challenged, like appropriate and productive use. You know, what does that look like? How do you balance productive use with protecting the native landscape. And then on the social and cultural values side, of course, you've got word expressions like community valuing, understanding and celebrating. How would we know that the community are valuing, understanding and celebrating? What would be happening that we could see and hear, and to actually help us detect that that's occurring? How do we know we are valuing Aboriginal heritage and the continuing contribution. How would we know that we've got a peaceful passive space, that we're sharing the multiple uses, maybe not just pedestrian cycle, they're just food for thought, as well as how would we know that we're getting recreational use. So to help us do that, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Just give me a second as we get through. Now this is where I'm going to have to ask you to pay close attention, because you'll see a big bunch of green boxes on there. I will explain to how we're going to use this. I am shortly going to share in the chat a link. I haven't done it yet. And I'm going to ask you to click on that link. You will then be able to come into this document, and which I'll actually put back into edit mode. So forgive me for a second while I just quickly do that. So you better come into this document, and when you type in here, we'll all be able to see it. We'll all be able to share it. So you just, I'm going to ask you to click on one of these boxes and start typing your thoughts in response to the question that's up at the top. Now, to help organize things, I'll just quickly show you, so I'm not sharing anymore, am I? I'll just quickly share again so I can show you how it works. Just on my desktop, there we go. So you'll see there's a whole bunch on the left hand side there. You'll see up there the green one, group 1. So you see it says group 1 at the top. So if you're in group 1, you'll be going to these green pages, and the first page is answering the how would you know that Merri Merri is improving from an environmental values perspective, and the second page is how would you know it's improving from a social. So for the first 15 minutes, I'm just going to get you just to focus on the environmental. Okay, so you're going to have 2 breakout groups as two sessions, and there'll be a break in between the sessions. So for the first 14 minutes, you'll be talking about with each other in a group of about 4 or 5 people, and you can just click on that and start typing it, and away you go. And we'll all be able to see that will be cared. So it's a bit like using a, you know, butcher's paper if we're all in a room together. Group 2, we'll use the red slides. You see at the top it says group 2, group 3, the blue slides, group 4, the ochre, group 5, the grey, and group 6, the black. So there you go. So that's going to be a great test of how clear my instructions can be or not. So we also have some great facilitators that will be popping around in amongst the room. So if you find yourself in a room all of a sudden and you're going, what are we going to do? Which one are we supposed to be on? Then you will have someone popping in fairly shortly to check in with you. But they've also talked about animals that we see at the moment, and animals that we don't see at the moment, more platypuses, reptiles, kangaroos, other amphibians, frogs, and on the other side, the reduced impact of pests, everything from rats and carp and everything else. So, but also one of the things that I know a lot of the groups have talked about is the changing nature of the waterway, how it is impacted by higher flows, storms and waterways, and what it looks like post a rainfall event versus, so, that's not just what's going on in the creek and you can't just pull it out. That's a systems thing, obviously, where it goes, how all that stuff is getting in every time it rains. You've done a great job in raising that. This is really rich stuff. We are going to be mining this and bringing it into and reflecting it back to this group. So we will be doing a summary of that. Thank you for the people that continue to work on it. Well done. But you've got it. You obviously you've got the idea of how it works. So we're going to go straight into the second version. And this is just, and by the way, the other thing I want to note is people started talking about human species appreciation of other species in whatever way that might manifest itself, and that crossover between social, cultural, environmental, which is really important, because you're absolutely quite right. Even though these things are sitting as 2 questions, they are not unrelated questions. They are very much interconnected questions. So we'll explore that in a minute. So I'm going to ask the facilitators of the group, Philly, it's the same, keep your screen open. We can, so come back and now just flip your thinking to more the social cultural value side. So how would you know, how would you be able to detect that we're moving in the right direction from a social and cultural values perspective? Thank you so much for the work you've done on that. So just flip that thinking and go into the second one of those slides in your colour, and I'll see you back here in 14 minutes. Okay, all right, well, I will just quickly sort of say, first of all, this is being kept and will be documented properly and fed back, so there's going to be more opportunity to explore it. This is not the sole source of truth. This is a part of an ongoing conversation. I wanted to sort of finish up by acknowledging something that we haven't talked a lot about, and that is that the creek is not an homogenous thing all the way along. You know, we've talked about a vision. When we talk about the creek, we often think about the creek as a thing, but of course it's different. It's one connected ecosystem weaving through multiple uses. And it was really interesting in our group, we were talking about, you know, how those diverse uses kind of manifest itself when you've got different people valuing the creek in different ways in different places. And we don't try to meet everyone's needs in one place. We had with us, we were lucky to have both a water specialist and a path building specialist and a transport specialist, and it was really interesting to hear about the challenges of making things, for example, disability compliant while protecting vegetation, and those things don't always go together. The role of lighting is a balancing act. Everything's a balancing act. So this is really giving us a way to actually help understand not only the creek as a whole, but the creek is a connected series of ecosystems. You've given us lots of rich food for thought. Thank you. I wish we had more time to talk about it as a whole group. Jane, I'm going to throw back to you because I know everyone's time is precious.
So thank you. That was, I got a lot out of those conversations and those sessions. I was flitting between two groups and thoroughly enjoyed both group conversations. So thank you, everyone. So just a slide here around some next steps. So action one is please continue to keep adding what you love about the creek and your vision for it. So we've got the project landing page, which will be, now that you've all had the announcement of the Wurundjeri Wurrung language, Merri Merri, that page will reflect the new project name, which is exciting. So jump on there. There's some really rich comments coming through. Please save the date for a in-person, fingers crossed, workshop at CERES on the morning of May the 10th. Information will be coming out about that next week. And on the next slide, I'm just going to share some current events that you can get involved with, some practical events. So one of these, and there's been a post in the chat about this, but it's coming up on the 7th of April and it's at Joe's Garden. You can see the details there on the right. That is also included in the project page, Consultations Moreland page. And then this next slide, I just wanted to do a shout out of some current projects that are happening through around the creek, and Merri Creek Management Committee and Friends of Merri and Australian Water Association, the one that I've just mentioned. So they're just listed there in terms of events starting on the 27th, running through to the 10th of April. All of those events can be seen in more details on those organisations' websites. I think next week we'll also include as a follow-up some of these current events as well. So this presentation will be uploaded to our project page. There are contact details if you would like to be in touch. Again, thank you for your time to attend today and to have participated in the online conversations. We look forward to sharing these with you and continuing to read what you love about the creek and your vision for it. Thank you and see you soon.